Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode on Fit as a Fiddle. I have a dear friend on the show today, somebody that I've known for a couple of years in New York City. Her name is Manon Chevallerau. She is a postpartum doula in New York City for over 22 years. She pioneered a lot of the fields in the city. She is also a newborn care and sleep expert, and she provides a lot of support around lactation and feeding, setting routines for your baby, and everything under the sun newborn related. So we have the very, very great honor of having Manon on the show today to chat with us a little bit about her expertise and share some knowledge with you guys. So Manon, welcome to the show.
Hi, Snare. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. You have a plethora of experience with all things that I just mentioned, but I would love for you to explain some of the things that you've done over the course of your career and maybe some of the things you're doing currently as well, so the listeners can get to know you a bit more.
Yeah, it has been a journey. I'm a mother myself. That's sort of where this all started with. My kids are grown, 29 and 22. And so I've sort of walked all the paths of that motherhood of raising, having newborns, going into toddlerhood and teenagers and all that. I've been a single mom through all that. So that sort of also put me in a certain path. And I always was very in tune with my instincts of just trusting it, because what else do we have, right? And that sort of helped me to be more in touch with myself and just making decisions, and for my own kids or in my own path of motherhood. And so when I started to become a postpartum doula, that was sort of the guidelines for me to walk in there and hand that over. But yeah, so I started as a postpartum doula right after my daughter was born, over 22 years. And I had experience as being born in Amsterdam and giving birth with a home birth for my son, Marlon, in Amsterdam.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, it was a home birth. Yeah. And so I'm from Amsterdam, and everyone there, I mean, at that point still did home births. So for me, I was pregnant already in New York, and I was like, well, I'm giving birth in Amsterdam. There's just no question about it. And so I went home to give birth, and there the government provides you with postpartum support.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit more, I would say it's a combination between a baby nurse and a postpartum doula. You do wear a white coat. You still do. So there's almost like it's a little bit more old-fashioned, but at that point it was only there what it was there, but it was extremely valuable. And there, they support with breastfeeding and recovery and all that. And for me, that was such an experience. So when I was pregnant for my daughter, Gina, here in New York, I was giving birth, and I had no family support here. And it was like, what do you do in New York for postpartum care? And then I found out about postpartum doula. So as I interviewed my doula and hired her, I called the service and I said, well, I'm hiring my doula, but I also want to become one. So at that point, it was like, okay, great, because you have the experience, you know what the concept is.
Mm-hmm.
I had already been a mother. And so that's sort of how I stepped into the New York doula world. At that point, you didn't need certification or training. It was very natural, sort of like, comes from the heart sort of a place. Read up in books and educate yourself, and hands-on, and then your own sort of personality and experience. So that's how I stepped into it.
Wow.
Yeah, and that grew. I mean, within a year, I had my private clients, and that sort of kept going. And then over the years, I started to create support groups, the very first downtown Manhattan mother support groups. Then I had a daddy group. That was the very first one ever, I think. Maybe there was an Upper West Side dad's group, but it was all downtown in Tribeca and targeting Battery Park and FIDDLE. And so that's where I created these support groups for several years, what created community, what created friendships, what created community, like online support systems, because from one of my groups it became a huge group downtown, and that sort of spread through the whole city. Everybody created an online support. So I've planted a lot of seeds over the years, like sort of like beginning parts and then a sort of backed away. I started work-life balance workshops for Amex way back, and it was the very first corporate workshops that there were until it was taken over by corporate. So it was really nice to sort of have stepped into places and then sort of back away. And so it's been great. And I've given a lot of workshops myself, classes, and worked for several startups. And it sort of became more as a expert. And currently still I am working with Phoebe, what is an online support network for pregnant and new moms. It's a community support with lots of experts, as you know, Sneha. And I'm there, the top tier postpartum doula and newborn care and sleep expert. So I'm sort of getting into a different niche that is a little bit more focused on newborn care and newborn sleep. So yeah, that's a little bit of a in a nutshell.
Wow. I know that there's like Manon is just like playing all of her accolades down right now for us. She has like so much more that we could talk about and dive into, because you've been doing this for like over 2 decades at this point. So the amount of impact that she's had in the community. I think also from everything that you're saying, those are all hot topics right now, right? Like work-life balance, especially after COVID. A huge proportion of mothers and females leaving the workforce to take care of families. These are all very, very big world problems and topics that we're discussing in all sorts of platforms. And so, having that insight or foresight to discuss some of this stuff way back from you, it's incredible. I mean, you had the awareness to see that there is a lot of imbalance between the way that female caregivers and male caregivers operate, especially in a big city like New York, when everyone's really in the workforce. There's not the proportion of stay-at-home moms that live in New York City versus in suburban and rural areas. There's a big difference, right? So I think that, all the work that you've done has really pioneered so many of these conversations and it's like a little pebble in the ocean that I'm sure has changed the way that people have thought about the world and how parenthood really works, and beyond. It's just incredible. We're so happy to have you, and I'm so happy to be your friend. I'm just going to call you my friend.
Yes, no, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yes.
We created our own community too, and it's wonderful. And to just connect with other experts, and always in different ways, but how we have met is like, it's part of that, right? It's like part of that community, part of that support system that can just spread, and we're all filling each other in with our expertise, and then it becomes a grander sort of like something that you can offer to people that need it, and most people need it. I mean, even if it's just a tiny bit, so just a tiny push, and then they're fine. And it's just finding that inner voice and finding that confidence and that instinct, and tapping into that. I think that's extremely important. And what I've learned over those years when I started as a postpartum doula, I mean, New York, and when I moved to New York 30 years ago, New York wasn't a town with kids. There were no babies. There were babies, but it was not everywhere. And I have to say, after 9/11, especially living downtown, I've seen the city explode. And it was for the good, because people's priorities shifted. It was not just a town that people came to work and work corporate and go home and sleep and wake up and work. And it became a different, it became a shift, and the reset was there. It was, the priorities were shifted. And that also, that was beautiful to see that, because family became a priority as well. But then there was that imbalance of like, how do we work and still be productive at our jobs, but how do we do it the same thing at home? How can we be the best parents? And New Yorkers want to be the best at everything. So it was a very pulling and pushing place, and it still is. But I do think I see shifts over the last 15 years or 20 years almost that I've done this within the whole part of work-life balance. And and I mean, COVID totally threw a whole wrench in it, but I think it's for the positive part, because people are working more from home. They're more part of families. They see their family more. They spend more time at home. It also broke barriers of like, everything needs to be perfect. It doesn't matter. It's like, I can see your room with your doors right now, and you know what I mean. Everybody has their backgrounds. The dog might bark, the baby might cry, the doorbell might ring. It's like, it's not perfect, but it's normal. It's life. And that, it was for me almost like, yes, great.
Yeah, we can all kind of take a chill pill and know that everybody's human.
I think that was almost, it was a very positive shift in what has happened, and everybody became creative and made it work. And look how everybody's doing it. It's beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And so, speaking of, because I know you just touched on the fact that, there are a lot more babies and a lot more families in the city over the last decade or so, or more maybe. For you, seeing that shift, like you saw the shift, you lived in the Netherlands, you came to the United States, you saw, family units with an incredible amount of family support. You saw a country in which postpartum care was standard. And then now where, families are not necessarily living with parents and in-laws and things like that. We have very nuclear, immediate families living together with less support. Age of the internet, where Mr. Google answers all of your questions, and just more families in a metropolitan place like New York City. I'd love to pick your brain on what are some things that have been said through centuries that babies are XYZ, or you should do XYZ, that you feel like have carried through, and maybe now the literature supports some of those things. Fantastic, but that's really the standard of how we should provide newborn care. And then maybe there are things that have been a norm for centuries, and now through modern day research or things that we've discovered now in our current society, maybe those are not things that we do anymore. I don't know. That's a really open-ended question, but I think it's useful for people to know, because there's so much out there that's just, information and blogs and all these things. And so coming from experts, I think, who have seen both sides of things, can be very useful for people.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there's so much noise out there of different philosophies and different methods, and Mr. Google, as you say, and then there's a lot of experts, and then there's the pediatricians, and then there's family, and then there's, you know, family that dealt with it 30 years ago or 40 years ago when moms were babies themselves. So there's a lot of different sort of input in it. And I would say one of the most important things, and I think that's also something really important for, especially New York, or we are, but also America, is that whole part of learning to tune into your instincts and trusting it. And it's that inner voice, and that's basically all we need. Of course, it's great to get expert information and get feedback and get guidelines and get that confidence, but and read up on things. But if you overload yourself, you drown in it. So it's always good to sort of retouch it. And I think that is something that has been through centuries and through cultures, without, when we had access to books and internet and anything else, knowing about other cultures, that was just what we did, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that is just really important to build that. And then what I always say to my clients and parents is that gain all that information and put it in a pile in front of you on the table, and pick your things out, what works for you. And then it becomes your story, because everybody's story is different. And you know, it's your story, and it's a little different than your friends or your families. And that's also, I think, sometimes really difficult, is that people compare to each other, and you know, oh, that baby is this big, so that means my baby is not big enough, or is not eating enough, or you know, what can I do about it? And then you go Google it, and it's like you're going into this world of comparison and doubting your own inner voice. And that inner voice is, I think, the most important thing ever that you can have as a parent. And it's you know, it's a challenge. I mean, I worked through that, the whole story of raising my kids, but it's really amazing to look back on it now, and seeing them as grown-ups, and what I've given them just only from listening to my inner voice. And that is, I think, really important. But I think there's, you know, if you look at more practical things, like, you know, cultures that have done baby wearing or swaddling, or, you know, there's certain things or methods that, you know, bonding, skin to skin. I mean, those are things that have been done through cultures and through centuries. And there are, you know, like for swaddling, for example, I'm a big advocate, especially when babies are really restless in month 2. They have more gas because the internal adjustment is happening, and they're very inward, and they're startled, and they grab the face awake, and they're like all over the place. So a good swaddle means that babies will sleep deeper, so the arms are down, and it has to be done correctly. And it doesn't mean if they come out that they don't like a swaddle, but they really, you know, it's, if you do it correctly, they give over, they surrender, and they sleep deeper, and they're calmer. And it's interesting because there's cultures that have done this forever. And I grew up, and this is one of the examples that was for me a lesson. I grew up in Holland when there were not swaddling babies. And I came here, and then they were swaddling. I was like, what are they doing with these babies? And then I discovered during work with all my clients how amazing it was and how beneficial it was. And now they're doing it in Holland. So it's like, you know, so these things sort of weave through cultures. Giving a baby a first bath in Holland, they do it right away, like the first day, even when a clam is still on their umbilical cords. Here, you wait until the cord falls off and it's dry so that you don't take risks for infection. So it's, there's different sort of ways to do it. Other countries, they bind it. In other countries, they use, ointments or herbs on it. Or so there's the different sort of weaves of like cultures and methods. But yeah, so there's some that sort of stick and move around.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah.
thinking as you're talking about baby wearing, we had both of our friends, Adrian Stair, come onto the show as well in this
Yeah.
season, actually, this past season, season 4, and she spoke about baby wearing.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to hear, because she's an expert, to hear her perspective of the history of all of that. And everybody, the thing is, I think what you're also trying to highlight here, which I completely agree with, when it comes to motherhood or infant care or anything related to that, is it depends. There's very rarely a 100% black or white answer. There are certain circumstances where there's 100% black or white answer, but in a lot of things where there's a question, it can be very difficult to give somebody a flat out answer, because every baby is different, every family is different, the way they want to go about things are different. The simple question of to breastfeed or to bottle feed, that it's just like an age-old question that just
absolutely,
it depends.
Yeah. No, it really does. And like you say, depends on community, depends on someone's body, it depends on how you live, it depends on your philosophies, it's your partner, not just you or not just the baby. It's a full-on package. And like I said, it's like everybody's story, right? It's like baby's personality. It has to do with that, because some babies are more patient than others, and the impatient babies, they have a harder time figuring out the breastfeeding, and they can be more challenging. Or it's like that. Or there's the lazy babies, and we need to get them going. And so there's a lot of that. And there's no black and white answers, totally not. I see guidelines that are very similar with babies' development that I work with, but it's in everybody's case it's different. And for me, it's really important that I can touch that if someone has a question, that I can go into it a little bit more and make that individual choice with them, what works best for everyone, not just for the baby, not just for the mom, not for, it's a full package for that family, their story. And that's what that is.
I love that. So on the topic of, newborn care very specifically, I know that there are so many different ways to soothe a baby. A lot of people have questions on, what are the different ways that I can do that? And in your experience, have you found that there are certain go-to moves that, I know that there might be multiple different kinds, but are there certain things that you feel like people should try first, and things that may work for most babies, or as, in general?
Yeah, I mean, first you want to sort of figure out why the baby needs soothing, right? So it's important to understand baby's cues. So it's important that you see and hear why is the baby crying, and what kind of cry is it, and is it on the clock, is it sort of like time to feed? So if a baby feeds average like every 2.5 to 3 hours properly, and if you're breastfeeding and there's plenty of milk, or if you're bottle feeding and you know exactly what they get, then they don't need to eat at an hour and a half. So if a baby has then a meltdown or is crying, what cue is that? So it's not the hunger cue. So if you start to differentiate those cues, you start to understand it better, and you start to be able to address it better. And then we're talking about soothing, right? It's like, well, so then if a baby has the hunger cues, then it means that you want to feed the baby. So then you soothe the baby that way. But if the baby has, a meltdown, you need to see how long is the baby be up for. So if the baby has been up for a certain amount of time, the tired cue is there. And if you miss that, babies get overtired, get meltdowns. So then you want to soothe the baby to help them to go back to sleep. If the baby has gas, that can happen at any time, particularly in month 2, like I mentioned earlier, is that you then need to address the gas to soothe them. So there's different reasons why you would need to soothe the baby, and there's different ways, but the bigger guideline, what works for most, is that for if they're tired, if they need to go to sleep or they have gas, is sucking. A lot of babies need nourishment to sort of, so sucking to sort of let go and go inward and to sort of reset themselves. And then either they pass gas or they poop or they fall asleep or whatever they need to do. So sucking is one of them. And in the beginning, you could do that with your finger. They can suck on your finger, clean, short nail down to the tongue, so it fits in their palate. And then after a couple of weeks, you can use a pacifier as a tool. I mean, and it's a tool, no worries about the attachment, you can wean off. But so some babies have that need more than others. So that's where these tools come in place to help them. It's the same as the swaddle. Almost all babies benefit from swaddling to let go and to relax and to fall asleep deeper. So swaddles are important. And then it's attachment, especially when babies are upset, if they're overtired, if they are gassy. Movement and touch and skin to skin, your heartbeat will help them to calm them down. So that's where Babywearing during a period of a lot of gas and restlessness is great, because they still sleep on you, you have your hands free, but babies are connected to you. And don't worry about spoiling them. I mean, up to 3 months, you can't really spoil a baby. You can totally wean them off of habits that you feel like you're going to get stuck with. I always say, like, I don't believe in bad habits. Any habits that work and everybody's happy with, nobody's there to judge that, right?
I love that. That's a good
yeah,
perspective.
It's, but if you say that you're rocking your baby to sleep all the time, and you go past 3 months and 4 months, 5 months, you're going to get stuck with that. And so if you want to break that, then there's a period of time between 2 and 3.5 months, somewhere there, that babies are much more adaptable, and you can help them to sort of wean off these things. So that's where, you don't need to soothe them as much. They can do it independently. And so before that, you can do anything that works. I mean, that's holding and rocking and sucking and swaddling. And I mean, Dr. Karp made all the 5 S's famous, and they work. I mean, those are the ones. And that's really, that's really how it works to soothe them. Unless babies really go into a place that they have extreme gas, you can do massaging, you can do rocking. They say, like, a lot of people do the bicycling with their legs, that I don't like as much, because it's very activating. I wouldn't like that if I had gas. Someone did that to me. So I push both knees up and I rock. What is way more relaxing. I mean, right? It's like, imagine if you had it yourself, then someone would do that to you. It's like, would surrender and relax, and you will pass what you need to pass. So that, I think, is those are sort of ways that you can help babies. And then there's gripe water, and there's things that can help with gas, but it's a state. Their babies go through stages, and in that 2nd month they would need most of the soothing, to say it like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you're highlighting is when you say as long as everybody's happy, there's really no bad habit. I think a lot of parents, and naturally so, might be hard on themselves for Dr. Google telling them, oh, that particular, pacifiers are bad, labeling them as bad. It's not good if your baby uses a pacifier to fall asleep or to stop crying. I know you hear these things, you read about these things, and that can be so harmful for people, for a parent who's like, oh my goodness, my baby literally is just using a pacifier in the second half of their second month to calm down. And if that is what is helpful for them, you want a crying baby, or do you want, a happy baby? We want a happy baby. So
exactly.
Yeah, I think that's where it kind of, and if a baby doesn't need it, then you wouldn't need to use it, which is why, again, a lot of the stuff when it comes to newborn care, when it comes to anything really within health and wellness, but especially when it comes to babies that are so unique, have their own personalities, like Manon said, even as working with pediatrics and newborns for developmental delay, there are these milestones that we learn, and there are these, certain things that you need to make sure that the baby achieves at a certain period of time. But again, with a grain of salt, because everybody's development looks different. Everyone's timeline looks a little bit different. You don't have to achieve independent sitting at 6 months in order to be a perfect baby. You can do it at 7 or maybe even 8. And, and that's okay. Maybe there's something going on there that we can assist the baby in different ways. It doesn't mean that the baby isn't going to, achieve something in their motor milestones at all. So similar to that, I think it's important for, if you're a parent and you're listening, if you are pregnant, or if you have a newborn, or you're thinking about, something like that in the future, take everything, all the information with a grain of salt. And like Manon said so beautifully, just put it all on the table and just pick out the pieces that make sense to you. And also, be encouraged to ask somebody for help who's been doing this for a while. And that's where Manon the doula comes into handy, somebody who's been doing this for a long time and understands this, from a, multi-lens perspective, working with babies over a course of generations where things have changed over that time. And also, taking the evidence and then putting that into, clinical practice and seeing how families actually react to some of that information that might be published in articles and things on how to care for your newborns. So yeah. What else? Do you have anything else to add to our conversation today? I know there's so much to talk about in this topic, but is there something you want to add?
Yeah, no, I do. I think it's really important. So trust your instincts, follow that inner voice, but also ask for help and ask for support, and create that support system and network around you with different experts. And it can be low cost or high cost. It doesn't, it is available, and thankfully it's more and more available out there. I'm setting also up an online classes. It's comprehensive with a labor doula. So we're doing this together to have for people, for all people to have access to our expertise. And it's on, it's affordable. We even do, scholarships. And so it's just stay tuned for this, because we're building it. And that's really something that, we want to focus that it's accessible for all. And that's, I think it's still not enough out there. So that's my mission. This is my focus. But I think for everyone to just, to find ways to get that support. And even if it's tiny little bits, just a one-time support or guidance, or, for lactation, for someone who can be there. And definitely, I mean, if you can get a postpartum doula who I think is experienced enough also to have understanding about newborns, so that they can guide you through that part. It's not just about getting good bone broth and get your get your steam baths. And it's also important that you get more of that. And that's where more experienced doulas will have that naturally, because that's, all these years they built the expertise. But yeah, I ask for help and create a network around yourself. That is really important. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Manon. Can you please tell our audience where they can find you online, your website and your Instagram?
Yes. So my website is newparentsjourney.com.
Mhm.
And also on Instagram, I'm at New Parents Journey. Super easy. And the new platform that we're building is called Birth to Baby Journey. So that's coming.
I'm excited for it. Well, I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to Manon today. She had some amazing tips to share, you know, really on the general topic of being a parent and having to go through a lot of different emotions and having to navigate through that, but also some practical ways you can soothe your baby. So if you guys have further questions or want to work with Manon, please reach out to her on her website or shoot her a DM on her Instagram. And hopefully we'll have you back on the show to talk about something else in the future too.
Sounds great.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Manon.
Snea, for having me.